I fix your favorite dishes, hoping this good food fills ya. Work my hands to the bone in the kitchen alone. You better eat if it kills you.
And today I'm going to go over something different. I'm going over a recipe. How to make bread. Yeah, bread. Something simple, but you'd be surprised how many people just can't do it or think it's too difficult, takes too long, it's too hard, whatever. This is also a video response to another YouTuber who's having trouble getting his bread to rise up right. So pay attention and I'll show you how I do it. I think he thinks the problem is because he lives at high altitude. Well, that has nothing to do with it or very little to do with it. I live, as you can see, I live at 9,367 feet above sea level. Well, 9,300 whatever feet above sea level. So I live way up high in the Rocky Mountains. So just thought I'd show you how I make bread, and it works just fine up here. Actually, bread rises even better at high altitude because there's less barometric pressure pushing down on the bread or on the dough to make it rise. So let's get started. First thing I need to talk about is the yeast. You can buy those little individual packets of yeast at your local grocery store. I don't suggest that. I suggest go to Costco. I get a Red Star 2 pounds. This is 2 pounds of yeast, okay? I get this. I think it's like $5 or $6. This is almost a year's supply for me, and I make bread almost daily. You can see I got it dated. This is when I bought it. Yeah, I ran out. I ran low, so I had to get another one. So anyway, I've got like 5 more of these. I think about 6 all at one time. So this is like $30, but that's like a 5-year supply of yeast. So these are nice vacuum packed. They're in really heavy duty Mylar bags. They last forever. This would be a great trade or barter item too. So, but this is 2 pounds of yeast. So I'm going to open this up, and when I do, I'm going to store it. I got a couple of jars here. I've got one that I keep in the kitchen. You can see there's what I have left just in the jar. This is what I keep in the kitchen, the smaller one. This one I go down and put back in the deep freezer. So anyway, and I store this stuff in my freezer. It'll store on the shelf just fine like this for years, as long as it's still vacuum sealed shut. But once I've opened it, I like to put it in the freezer, and also I like to put it in the freezer just in case. So anyway, these are a little bit of a pain in the butt. Oh, there you go. Hear that vacuum slurp? All right, and there's my yeast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up my kitchen jar. This kitchen jar, this will last me about 2 to 3 months, maybe more. You can see that's a lot of yeast. One packet of yeast is about 2 tablespoons, if that. This is just oodles and oodles and oodles of yeast. Lots of yeast. As you can see, that right there would probably be about $1,000 worth of yeast if you were to buy it in individual packages at $1 or $2. I think they're about $1.29 or something. A little package. One of those little tiny packages at the store. Now you can buy the live yeast, and that actually is better if you want to make certain types of breads like brioche or something like that. But for my purposes and our purposes, this works just fine. Whoa, that went a little bit over. It's okay, we're going to use some right away. But the first thing you want to do is once you do that, make sure the jar is clean and dry, and then just seal her up with a good canning lid, just like that. That's 6 months supply of yeast right there. So I've got that set aside. Now we're going to start on the bread. Yeah, the bread. Okay, regular bowl, an egg. Okay, maybe wondering, whoa, egg? You don't need an egg for bread. It makes it fluffier, it makes it lighter, and it makes it stand up better. And that's one of the mistakes I think he was making. Next, I got olive oil in my little olive oil container here, and I'm going to put in probably about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half of olive oil. Okay, you need the oil so your bread dough doesn't get lumpy. You ever mix flour and water? It just turns into a big lump. Next, I'm going to add salt, kosher salt, and I'm going to add about a tablespoon. That's about a tablespoon right there, a little under. Right there, maybe a pinch more. Make it a tablespoon. Okay, and I'm one of these chefs. I've done it so long that I know what I'm doing, and I can just eyeball it and see what I've got and see, yeah, that's right, that's accurate. Okay, so then, gonna whisk this all together till smooth. The salt helps break up the egg. As you can see, that's smooth now. That's why I put the salt in here instead of in with the flour. See how smooth that became all of a sudden? Doesn't take long. The salt acts as kind of an abrasive. Breaks up that egg white protein and distributes it a little more evenly. Along with the olive oil does the same thing. You can see, real quick, okay? Next, we're gonna make our yeast starter. And we're gonna use a mason jar for that too. This is 12 ounce. It's actually about 16 or about 14 or 15. You can see it's got the measurements up here. You got 1 cup here, cup and a half. I'm going to put in 12 ounces of hot water right out of my tap, right out of the faucet. Make sure it's good and hot. You don't want the water to be more than about 115 degrees. If you do, you're going to kill the yeast. What we're trying to do is activate the yeast, get it going, get it started munching, eating all that stuff. Okay, so there I got a cup and a half of water right there. Got a cup and a half of water. Now some people use sugar. I hate sugar. I don't like using regular plain old sugar. No. This goes in tea and coffee. I use honey. Actually, I like honey in my tea as well. I like sugar in my coffee primarily. And I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of honey. Now this is a local honey. This I got from a local place. Guy down the road from me. There we go. You can see I took it right up to about the neck of the jar there. There we go. And that makes the sugar water. That's about 2 tablespoons. Now, all I'm going to do is mix that up. It's okay if a little bit of egg gets in there. Dissolve. See, that's why I do it in a jar. Makes it easier to mix the honey in really good. So you get nice sweet water. The yeast is going to love this. The yeast is going to love it. Okay? Right there. Then I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of yeast. Actually, I'm going to use a measuring spoon now. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, see, I put way too much in there. That's okay. It's so cheap, I can waste it. 1. We'll go for about 2. Okay? Then we're going to mix that in there. Just dissolve it. It'll dissolve on its own too, but this just speeds things up. Okay, the honey cooled down the water just to about 110, 115 degrees. I do this almost daily at my house, so I've gotten really good at it. Know exactly when to start. And see, look at all that yeast. That right there is about a packet of yeast, maybe a packet and a half at the store. It's about it'd be about $3 or $4 of yeast. It's about a nickel's worth of yeast. I'm just gonna dump it. I don't need it. It'll work really good in the septic system anyway. You can actually add a little bit of yeast to energize your septic system too. So just regular yeast. It'll sit there and digest. You don't want to have too much in there though. I still got a tiny bit left. I'll use that tomorrow. And then just like the other jar, now that I'm done with it, I'm going to cap it. Or not cap it, but put the lid on. Just regular ball canning jar. Good mason jar. Just make sure you have a good lid. Good rubber seal on it. Keep it airtight. Put that to the side. Put my honey away. Now what I'm going to talk about while the yeast is getting all happy and bubbling and getting all happy is bread flour. Okay, or the flour that you use. This is the most important, one of the most important things. Okay, the flour, all flour is not the same. You have different kinds of flour. This is baker's flour. This is bread flour, which means it's different than your general kind of all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is a finer grain. It also has some salt and a little bit of usually sodium bicarbonate or something like that, like baking powder or baking soda in it. One, it helps keep it smooth and it keeps it from clumping, and also it activates it. Look at that. See that rise? That means my yeast is happy. You can sit there and watch it and it'll just keep going up. You use, and it has a back to the bread, to the flour. The regular flour is done with a different kind of wheat, and it doesn't have as high a gluten content. Gluten content is what you want, high gluten content. Gluten is kind of like a rubber band in bread. It's makes the bread, makes it kind of, it makes it firmer, okay, which means it'll hold its shape better. You always want to use bread flour instead of regular flour. I got to put this in here. Now that goes in with the egg and the oil and the salt. Just give that a quick stir real quick, mix it in, make sure it's all in there. There we go. Okay. And that cooled it down a little bit more, so it slowed it down. This is all just room temperature, except for the yeast starter. Okay. Then I got a half cup measure here, and I'm going to measure in about 4 cups of flour. This is a half cup, so that's half a cup, 1 cup, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 4. I'm going to start with 4. Now I'm not going to use the whisk to mix this. No, 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 no. You'll end up with a giant ball of dough on there. I'm going to use a fork, plain old fork. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need a bread maker or anything like that. They've been doing like this for thousands of years. I'm just going to slowly work the flour in there. Get that in there. And this is something you got to be willing to get your hands a little dirty. But it's fun. This is something great to do with your kids. You start the dough and then you let them knead it. Let them get all those aggressions out, especially little kids. Tell them, okay, here you go, pound the dough. And they can beat it up and they can pound on it and they can do all they want to it. And have them knead it. And it's a lot of fun to do with them too. And then they learn something. They learn how to make bread. One of the simplest things in the world, as you can see how it's starting to come together there? But it's a great little activity to do with your kids. They love it. And I about live on homemade pizza at home with this bread dough recipe. There we go. You know you've got enough flour when you mix it and it doesn't stick to the bowl anymore. If it's still sticking to the bowl and you're mixing, then you need a little bit more flour. Once it stops sticking to the bowl, it's got enough, just as it stops sticking to the bowl, it's got enough flour. Okay, there we go. Mix that in a little bit better. And you can see I might have a little bit, no, sticking to my fingers a bit. There we go. And just keep kneading it in there. There we go. Look at that. See, I just pulled away from there. You can even use it to pull the rest of the flour off the bowl. See how it doesn't stick to the bowl? That's when you have enough flour. Okay? Now, I'm going to add a little bit of flour to my cutting board. Turn the camera a bit. Look at that. See, it didn't stick to the bowl. Now this is just a basic generic bread recipe. This is just for regular white bread. If you want to make a wheat bread, then you substitute 1 of the cups of white flour for wheat flour. And that's about it. And if you notice, you can just rub your hands together almost like you're washing them. It'll come right off your hands. It just peels right off there. And you mix that in there. And kneading is also important. And how you knead makes a big difference. And if you can see my technique here. If the dough starts, while you're kneading, if the dough starts sticking to your hand, you can always add a little more flour. This is not an exact recipe, okay? Bread is not an exact recipe. It's just kind of generalized, okay? You can follow recipes in cookbooks, and because of a small variable that you don't know about, it may get mixed up and it might get screwed up. Don't worry about it, okay? Just have fun with cooking. A little more flour. Look at that. And I'm really pushing hard on this dough. The reason for kneading is we're bringing out the gluten. That gluten is making chains of vegetable protein. Okay, you've probably heard about textured vegetable protein. If I were to wash this with water, if I were to knead it for a long time, wash it with water, knead it again, wash it with water, I'd end up with textured vegetable protein. Wheat protein to be exact. Look at that. See how it's still picking up a little bit of flour? There we go. See, I'd knead it, turn it, push it in, turn it, push it in, turn it. And you'll feel the dough get firmer and firmer as you knead it. It gets harder and harder to knead. Much harder. And that's that gluten working together. That's those gluten chains bonding with each other and forming, and they become elastic. The more you knead the dough, the tougher the bread is going to be, and the harder it is for it to rise. Okay, look at that. See, it's not sticking to my hands much. Well, that's left over. There we go. You can always put a little bit of flour on your hands too. But when you get a good bread dough, it will just sit there. There we go. I'm about there. See, it's not sticking to the cutting board at all. See? That's a good dough. Look at that. And you can pound on it. This is what you get your kids to do. Get your kids, tell them to punch the dough. Beat it up. It's bad. Get it. It's bad dough. There we go. Look at that. And use the heel of your hand to knead, not your fingers, because they'll get in there, see, they'll pull out the dough. Use the base, the palm of your hand. And you pull back, push it together, push down, just like that. And if you do it right, and that evenly mixes the dough as well. There we go. Just a few minutes of kneading initially is all you need. Look at that. That's dough. Okay? Now, we've mixed the initial dough, so what we're going to need to do now is let it rise. Let that yeast get all heavy. So we're just going to take same bowl, drop it in. Now we're going to cover it with plastic wrap so it doesn't lose moisture. There we go. Close that off. You can do this with a wet towel, although I don't recommend it because sometimes the towel will get stuck to the dough. Plastic wrap is cheap. Got this thing at Costco. That lasts me almost a year. And I do this daily, and I use this for everything. But anyway, I digress. So there we go. Just seal it up good. Just so you don't lose moisture. Okay. Now what the yeast is doing, the yeast is in there. It is eating the honey. It's eating the sugar and the natural sugars in the flour. And as it does that, it produces a few things. It produces, one, carbon dioxide. That's how you get bubbles in the dough. Okay. Second thing it produces are yeast esters, and these are little chemicals that each individual strain of yeast gives off. They give it a specific flavor. That's why sourdoughs are always different from each other. Different yeast produce different yeast esters. And then it also produces something, alcohol. Yummy alcohol. So, but when you bake it, all the alcohol goes away. Okay? So, and you can see it's warm. You can see the steam coming up now too. Okay? So I'm going to set this to the side. I'm going to set it in a nice warm place. Okay? And I'm going to put the camera on time lapse, and you'll see it rise. You'll literally see it rise. Okay? And actually you can probably see it starting to rise right now. So I'm going to put this over on top of my stove. And I'm going to put the camera over here. And I'll put it on time lapse, okay? Okay, everybody, we're back again. As you can see, it rose. Oh boy, did it rise. Look at that. And that was about 45 minutes, and it almost tripled in size. There we go. Toss that away. Don't need that. Now we got our dough. Look at that. That is just a huge amount of dough. Put some flour in my hands so it doesn't stick to my hands. Pull it off the edge of the bowl. And it gets a little wetter because it's created some alcohol. So, what we're going to do, roll it around a bit. There we go. Take a little bit more flour. Now we're going to do a second kneading. And we're going to do it just like we did last time. You'll notice it's gotten a lot fluffier, a little lighter. So we're just going to keep going. And this second knead is where you're really building up that gluten. You're really building up those chains of gluten to make the dough elastic. And you'll feel it when you push down, it feels almost like a rubber band. And very springy. This helps work the carbon dioxide that it built up into the dough more too. And the more you knead it like this, also remember, the tougher it's going to get. See, it's harder and harder. Push that down. But that's it. So, and after this, if you want to use this now, you could use this right now. All you got to do is just shape it. So you want to make a dinner roll. We'll just pinch off dinner roll size, a little bit smaller than a dinner roll. Roll it into a ball. Just like this. Set it there. That'll be a big roll too. And then you want to let that proof. You're going to put that on a cutting, or you're going to put that on a baking rack or a cookie sheet. Just lightly floured, and let it rise. And let it rise for about another 45 minutes, and that'll triple in size. And you have a nice big dinner roll from just this one thing, or a hamburger bun size even, from something like that, because it'll keep rising.
All of my friends are welcome. Don't make me coax you, moax you. Eat the tables, the chairs, the napkins, who cares? You gotta eat if it chokes you.